Imagine building a wrestling empire so outrageous that it turns fake fights into billion-dollar paydays and even gets sold in a $21 billion mega merger. Well, that's the kind of Irish-American money we're diving into today. Here are the richest Irish families in America. And trust me, this list only gets crazier as we count down. At number 12, the Dorsey family, Jack Dorsey. Kicking things off, we've got a billionaire who looks less like a Wall Street mogul and more like a meditation coach. Jack Dorsey, the St. Louis-born son of an Irish Catholic family, is the guy who co-founded Twitter back in 2006. What started as a quirky micro-blogging site turned into the global bullhorn where presidents rage, celebrities overshare, and revolutions catch fire. Not bad for a side project. But Jack didn't stop at tweets. He also built Square, now called Block, the payment platform that turned coffee carts and small shops into mini digital empires. With these two companies alone, he stacked up a fortune that still hovers around $4 to $5 billion in 2025, even after Twitter's chaotic twists and turns. Here's the thing though, Dorsey isn't your typical billionaire. While others flex yachts and mega mansions, Jack's out here fasting for days, walking barefoot through San Francisco and spending his mornings in meditation. Then he'll casually pledge $1 billion to global causes like COVID-19 relief, because apparently enlightenment pairs well with philanthropy. His story is a perfect example of how Irish-American wealth has evolved. It's no longer just dynasties passing down factories and oil fields. Sometimes it's the kid who wrote some code and accidentally changed the way the world argues online. But as cool as that sounds, nothing we've told you so far compares to the next family, who turned steel chairs, body slams, and soap opera feuds into one of the wildest fortunes you'll ever hear about. At number 11, the McMahon family, Vincent McMahon. All right, buckle in, because this one is insane. The McMahons didn't just build wealth, they built spectacle. With Irish roots and a flair for the dramatic, Vince McMahon took over his father's modest wrestling promotion in the early 80s and flipped it into the global circus now known as WWE. Now, here's where it gets even wilder. Wrestling in those days was local, small-time shows in smoky halls. But Vince had the audacity to buy out competitors, bring everything under one banner, and then slap it on national TV. Suddenly, you had Hulk Hogan flexing in living rooms, The Rock cutting electrifying promos, and Stone Cold Steve Austin cracking beers on primetime. He turned scripted mayhem into must-watch TV, and the real jaw-dropper? In 2023, McMahon sold WWE in a $21 billion merger with UFC. That's right. What started as his dad's regional hustle became part of one of the most valuable sports entertainment companies on earth. Vince alone sits on 2 to 3 billion personally, but the family's influence is worth far more than that. And the timing of all this couldn't have been more bizarre. Vince had actually stepped away amid scandals, since the drama was, of course, not just in the ring, only to return and cut the deal that cemented the family's billionaire status. Talk about booking your own comeback storyline. It begs the question, was Vince McMahon just a brilliant businessman or the greatest showman in American capitalism? Because who else could turn fake fights into real billions? Either way, this is the moment in our countdown where things get even crazier. Because while Vince turned scripted chaos into cash, this next Irish-American tycoon made his billions in a far more traditional arena, the actual sports. At number 10, the McNair family, Robert McNair. Switching gears from body slams to boardrooms, let's talk about Robert McNair, the Houston businessman with Irish roots who built one of the most under-the-radar fortunes on this list. His empire started in the energy sector with Cogen Technologies, which grew into one of the largest power generation companies in America. When he sold it to Enron in 1999, he pocketed a staggering $1.5 billion. Now, McNair could have retired to a yacht and called it a day. Instead, he went out and bought himself an NFL team. In 1999, he founded the Houston Texans, bringing football back to Houston after the Oilers left for Tennessee. And if you know anything about the NFL, you know owning a franchise is basically owning a money printer that also happens to throw touchdowns. The McNair fortune today sits around $4 billion, with his family still holding the Texans and investing heavily in other ventures. But Robert's impact wasn't just about dollars. He poured hundreds of millions into medical research, cancer centers, and universities, leaving a legacy that stretches way beyond Houston's stadium lights. So while the McMahons built their wealth on kayfabe drama, McNair made his billions by selling energy, then doubled down by buying into America's biggest sport. And trust me, when you sell your company to Enron for over $1 billion and then use that fortune to buy an NFL team, you're playing a very different game altogether. But the next family on our list? Forget about playing any game. These guys turned personal tragedy into a global brand you've probably got hanging in your closet right now. At number 9, the Boyle family, Timothy Boyle. From the bright lights of the NFL, we move to something a little closer to home, your jacket. If you've ever zipped up a Columbia Sportswear coat on a cold morning, you've chipped into the Boyle fortune. This Irish-American family's story is equal parts grit and grit-your-teeth resilience. When Neil Boyle, the company founder, passed away unexpectedly in the 70s, his widow, Gert Boyle, and their young son, Timothy, suddenly had to run what was then a tiny, struggling outdoor gear company. It could have gone under. Instead, Gert leaned into her now iconic one tough mother persona, starring in cheeky ads, while Timothy focused on scaling the business. Fast forward a few decades, and Columbia is a multi-billion-dollar empire, competing head-to-head with Patagonia and North Face. Timothy Boyle, who still leads the company, is worth around $2 billion, but the brand's real value is cultural. It's about outfitting everyday adventurers, hikers, campers, and kids trudging through rainy mornings to school. What sets the Boyles apart isn't flash, but resilience. They didn't inherit palaces or football teams. They took a company on the brink and grew it into a global powerhouse. And they haven't forgotten their roots either. The family has donated millions to universities and local initiatives, strengthening the very community that supported them. But while the Boyles were busy selling parkas and hiking boots, the next Irish-American heavyweight was building something a little less cozy, but far more lucrative, an insurance empire. And not just any insurance. We're talking about a company so massive that it insures everything from Fortune 500 giants to, for all we know, the very jacket you're wearing right now. At number 8, the Ryan family, Patrick Ryan. If you've ever insured a business deal or seen those skyscraper-sized corporate logos for Aon, you're looking at the fingerprints of Patrick Ryan. This Chicago titan with deep Irish-American roots turned what sounds like a dry business, insurance and risk management, into one of the largest financial services empires on the planet. Ryan founded Aon back in 1982, and under his leadership, the company exploded into a global giant, handling billions in risk coverage and consulting for clients worldwide. Today, Aon is the kind of corporate colossus that governments, Fortune 500 companies, and even sports leagues depend on when they need someone to calculate what could go wrong and how much it'll cost. That kind of foresight made Ryan personally worth somewhere in the $8 to $9 billion range, cementing his family among America's Irish elite. But here's the thing, Ryan didn't just build a business, he built a legacy. He's poured massive sums into Chicago, funding Northwestern University, backing civic projects, and even spearheading the city's iconic Millennium Park development. So while other dynasties made headlines with castles, tech empires, or sports spectacles, the Ryans remind us that real financial muscle sometimes comes from the guy making sure everyone else's fortunes are properly insured. Now, insurance might sound like the dull uncle at the family reunion, but in Patrick Ryan's case, it turned into an $8 billion fortune. And speaking of fortunes built in ways most of us don't fully understand, let's now move to the next Irish-American billionaire in our list who made his billions buying other people's financial nightmares. Yep, this next guy got rich, turning disaster into cold, hard cash. At number 7, the Grayken family, John Patrick Grayken. If Wall Street has a back alley where broken companies and bad loans go to die, John Patrick Grayken is the guy quietly waiting with a fat checkbook. The Boston-born financier who proudly traces his roots back to Ireland built a multi-billion-dollar empire by doing what most people would run screaming from: buying distressed assets. Grayken founded Lone Star Funds in the mid-1990s, a private equity firm that swooped in whenever banks wanted to dump non-performing loans, foreclosed properties, or companies on the brink. Where others saw financial wreckage, he saw dollar signs. It's the kind of investing strategy that earns you nicknames like vulture capitalist, and Grayken has worn that label all the way to the bank. By 2025, Grayken's personal net worth sits around $6.9 billion, making him one of the richest Irish Americans alive. Lone Star has handled more than $80 billion worth of investments across 400 deals, stretching from American real estate to European banks and even Asian markets. In short, if someone else is losing sleep over a financial disaster, there's a good chance Grayken is making money off it. But here's the kicker. While he thrives on messy investments, his personal life is almost monk-like in contrast. He's known for his discretion, preferring low public exposure despite controlling an empire that spans continents. And yet, despite this understated lifestyle, he's given hundreds of millions to philanthropy, particularly in medicine, education, and environmental causes. So what's the lesson from Grayken? That sometimes the fastest way to a fortune is leaning into the chaos everyone else is running from. But while Grayken built his billions by chasing chaos, our next Irish-American mogul went the complete opposite route. He created order in the chaos of TV cables, rewired how Americans watched entertainment, and then casually became the largest private landowner in the country. Let's talk about the so-called cable cowboy. At number 6, the Malone family, John Malone. Meet John Malone, the media mogul who earned the nickname Cable Cowboy, and not just because he made his billions in television. With Irish parents and a no-nonsense upbringing in Connecticut, Malone rewired America's media landscape, turning Telecommunications Incorporated, TCI, into the largest cable provider in the US before selling it to AT&T in 1999 for a jaw-dropping $50 billion. But here's where it gets quirky. Malone isn't just about screens and satellites. He also happens to be the largest private landowner in America, with more than 2.2 million acres of ranches, forests, and farmland to his name. That's more than the size of Delaware and Rhode Island combined. And because heritage matters, he also owns multiple castles back in Ireland. Because why not make your billionaire portfolio look like something straight out of Game of Thrones? With a net worth hovering around $9 to $10 billion, Malone sits comfortably among the richest Irish Americans. Yet he's kept a surprisingly low public profile, channeling much of his fortune into education, conservation, and Irish cultural projects. Malone's story is a fascinating hybrid, part ruthless corporate dealmaker, part gentleman rancher, and part heritage enthusiast. He shows that modern dynasties don't just build companies. Sometimes they buy entire landscapes to match. But if you think owning castles is impressive, let us show you the next family that practically owns New York's entertainment heartbeat. At number 5, the Dolan family, Charles Dolan. If you've ever binge-watched HBO, tuned into AMC, or caught a game at Madison Square Garden, you've brushed up against the Dolan Empire. Charles Dolan, the Irish-American entrepreneur who started with a vision for cable television in the 1970s, reshaped how America consumes media. He launched HBO in 1972, pioneering premium cable before most people even understood the concept of pay TV. Later, he founded Cablevision, which grew into one of the nation's largest cable providers, before its eventual sale to Altice for $17.7 billion. But the Dolan influence didn't stop there. Today, the Dolan family controls AMC Networks and MSG Entertainment, which includes the legendary Madison Square Garden Arena, the New York Knicks, and the Rangers. That's not just wealth, that's cultural relevance at the highest level. Their combined fortune sits around $6 to $7 billion, placing them among America's richest entertainment dynasties. Philanthropy has also been part of the playbook, with donations to education, hospitals, and the arts. But make no mistake, the Dolans' true claim to fame is their grip on the intersection of sports, entertainment, and media. If you've ever argued over Knicks tickets or gotten hooked on a gritty AMC drama, you've felt their reach. And while that's a media empire built on cultural dominance, here's an Irish-American billionaire who didn't need cable boxes or basketball arenas to make his fortune. All he needed was an app that convinced millions of people to swap faces with their dog, send disappearing selfies, and redefine how a generation communicates. At number 4, the Murphy family, Bobby Murphy. When people think of Irish-American wealth, the usual suspects are old dynasties in politics, finance, or media. But Bobby Murphy broke the mold, literally by coding one. The son of an Irish-American mother and Filipino father, Murphy co-founded Snapchat while still a student at Stanford. What started as an app for disappearing messages quickly morphed into one of the most influential social platforms of its era. By the time Snap Inc. went public in 2017, Murphy was catapulted into billionaire territory, joining a rare club of under-30 moguls who shaped digital culture. His net worth hovers around $7 to $8 billion today, making him one of the richest self-made Irish Americans in the tech space. And to put his vision into perspective, Snapchat turned into something far more than just another social app soon after its launch. It pioneered augmented reality filters, new ways of digital communication, and an entire visual language that rewired how young people talk, share, and joke with each other online. In other words, Murphy didn't just make an app, he helped shape the way a generation communicates. Philanthropy has also been part of the package. Through the Snap Foundation, Murphy has channeled millions into education, the arts, and public health initiatives. For someone whose fortune is tied to fleeting photos, he seems committed to building long-lasting impact. Murphy's story represents a generational leap. From immigrant roots to Silicon Valley billionaire, from old money dynasties to new money tech. And while that's a fascinating twist, the next family proves that when it comes to Irish-American legacy, sometimes the oldest name in the book still carries the most weight. At number 3, the Kennedy family. The Kennedy name is practically shorthand for Irish-American power, ambition, and yes, tragedy. It all began with Patrick Kennedy, a poor immigrant from County Wexford who arrived in Boston in the 1840s. Fast forward less than a century, and his grandson, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., had turned the family into one of America's most formidable dynasties, amassing wealth through banking, stock market plays, Hollywood studios, and real estate. Joseph's empire laid the foundation for the political juggernaut that followed. John F. Kennedy became America's first Catholic president. Robert and Ted Kennedy became Senate powerhouses, and dozens of Kennedys have since filled public office or influenced policy. Even when their wealth splintered across generations, their brand remained priceless. Collectively, the Kennedys still hold fortunes in the high hundreds of millions to perhaps a couple of billion. But their true capital has always been influence. Few families can rival the blend of money, charisma, and historical significance the Kennedys represent. Their philanthropy runs wide, with major initiatives in education, healthcare, human rights, and diplomacy. What sets them apart isn't just their portfolio, it's their place in America's imagination. The Kennedys weren't simply rich, they became mythic, weaving Irish immigrant grit into the story of American possibility. And yet, even this iconic dynasty isn't the richest. The next family turned a media company into a telecom empire that dwarfs even Camelot's coffers. At number 2, the Cox Kennedy family, Jim Kennedy. Here's a name that doesn't always get shouted from rooftops, but should: the Cox family, with Irish-American roots running through founder James M. Cox, who started as a newspaper publisher in Dayton, Ohio. Over a century later, that one printing press has ballooned into Cox Enterprises, a private giant straddling cable television, broadband internet, automotive services, and media outlets. At the helm for decades was James "Jim" Kennedy, the founder's grandson, who transformed the company from a regional player into a national powerhouse. Under his leadership, revenues multiplied nearly tenfold, all while keeping the business family controlled, no small feat in a cutthroat industry. The numbers are staggering. The Cox fortune today sits around $30 to $35 billion, putting them light years ahead of traditional dynasties like the Kennedys. Jim Kennedy himself is worth between $8 to $10 billion, though the real strength lies in the collective family empire. Their philanthropy is generous but understated, directed toward education, healthcare, and environmental causes. What makes them fascinating is the dual legacy. They're both media royalty and telecom innovators, bridging the old world of ink and newspapers with the new world of digital connectivity. In short, Cox Enterprises is less a family business and more a multi-generational kingdom. And yet, even they must step aside for the true crown jewel of Irish-American wealth. The man who turned hedge funds and high-frequency trading into a $50 billion fortune. At number 1, the Grayken family, Ken Griffin. And now, we've arrived at top of the mountain. Ken Griffin, with Irish heritage running through his Florida roots, stands today as the richest Irish-American alive. His story begins in the 1990s when, fresh out of Harvard, he founded Citadel with nothing more than a few computers, a dorm room, and a sharp instinct for markets. What followed is the stuff of Wall Street legend. Citadel grew into one of the world's largest hedge funds, managing more than $69 billion in assets. Its sibling, Citadel Securities, became a dominant market maker, handling a massive chunk of all US stock trades. Griffin didn't just play the game, he rewrote it, pioneering quantitative strategies that turned algorithms and data into weapons of financial dominance. By 2025, his net worth sits in the $44 to $50 billion range. That's not just rich, that's dynastic, the kind of wealth that puts him shoulder to shoulder with the global elite. Yet, Griffin isn't all spreadsheets and algorithms. His philanthropic footprint is colossal, with nearly $500 million donated to universities, hospitals, and cultural institutions. In Chicago, Miami, and New York, his name is etched onto buildings, museums, and research centers. Griffin's empire represents the ultimate evolution of Irish-American wealth, from immigrant grit to hedge fund dominance, from Boston's docks to Wall Street's boardrooms. His fortune is built not on land or media or politics, but on pure intellect and risk, the modern crown jewel of finance. And there you have it. From beer barons to tech disruptors, from political dynasties to hedge fund kings, the richest Irish families in America. Which one of these fascinated you the most? Let us know in the comments. And for more such interesting peeks into the lives of the rich, take a look at the channel.